Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from FedInsider. And on behalf of the George Washington University College of Professional Studies, Caresoft, and Datadog, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on reassessing modernization priorities. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod. If we don't get to them during today's show, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab on the left side of your screen to download today's slides and other reading materials and case studies on the topic. You can also join our chat over there. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available for download in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all survey questions and stay online for the duration of today's 60-minute conversation. And now, let me turn over the reins to our moderator, John Breeden from FedInsider. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Claudia, and hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm John Breeden, and today I will be moderating what I know is going to be a very lively discussion about a really interesting topic, and that is smart ways that agencies and other organizations are reassessing their modernization priorities and optimizing them to align with best practices like zero trust, observability, and data-driven decision-making. Now, the recent pause in government operations gave a lot of agencies an opportunity to look at their modernization efforts and realign certain projects in terms of reevaluating risk, reestablishing momentum, and sharpening their focus on resilience, security, and, of course, mission impact. Rather than slowing progress, that pause helped a lot of agencies refocus their efforts for better, more efficient results. And along those lines, our guests today from both government and industry are all busily working on those newly focused modernization efforts. We're going to talk with them about the challenges that agencies are facing and get some great advice about how to move those projects ever forward. So it's going to be an exciting show, and also, I'm pretty sure, a really informative one. So let's meet our talented guests for today, and then we can get started. First off, I'm honored to be able to welcome Bridget Carper-Arnone to the show. She is the Deputy CIO for the Department of Energy. Bridget, it is a real honor to have you joining us today. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, John. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And we also have another very talented guest joining us today. Jeff King is the Chief Information Security Officer for the Securities and Exchange Commission. Jeff, it's a real honor to have you with us today. Welcome to the show to you as well.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Great. And we are very fortunate to have another really well-known expert in this area joining us as our industry guest today. Emilio Escobar is the CISO for Datadog. Emilio, I know how busy you are, so thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk with our audience today about this really critical topic. Welcome to the show.
Not a problem, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, thank you all again for being here. We have a lot of really interesting items on the agenda to talk about. This is a really fascinating topic. I'm really looking forward to getting some great lessons learned from these amazing folks. Now, as I mentioned, all of our guests today, they also have some really interesting and impressive backgrounds that really make them the top experts in this field. So let's take a moment to learn just a little bit more about the really amazing people that we're fortunate enough to be able to spend the next hour with. So, Bridget, let's start with you, if that's okay. Now, as I mentioned, you're the Deputy CIO for the Department of Energy. I know that Energy is always working on some really fascinating technical projects. We have a lot of guests from Energy. It's always great to have them here. So, supporting those efforts as the Deputy CIO, it must be a really interesting as well as a very important job, of course. How long have you been with the Department of Energy, and can you share with us some of your rich history working both in technology and, of course, in government service?
Yes, John. So like you said, I am officially Deputy CIO, but I also serve as DOE's Chief Data Officer, Senior Geospatial Officer, and manages the department's Spectrum Office. So those are the hats that's not part of my title that I inherited over the last 3 years since being here in 2023. And so one of the big areas that we've been focusing on is AI development. And so a lot is around like the generative AI suite, but then there's areas that are too big to just get solved by like a simple chat bot. So that we're looking at bigger efforts around enterprise platforms and how, because DOE is 90 different department elements, how we're able to build technology that can span across. And so that has its own unique challenges that we're able to cover. But part of my background prior to joining Department of Energy, I was at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, whereas my customer relationship and performance area, that was what we were tasked with. How can we provide better customer service using our technology? And before then, I was in private industry as a consultant looking at different ways to support the federal government. So my entire time in Washington, D.C., whether as the consulting helping the government or the government needing consulting to help us, it's been a great partnership to know that both sides are needed to be able to successfully get anything accomplished.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that with us, Bridget. You have a very interesting history. Appreciate you being here. And Jeff, welcome to you as well. Now, you are the Chief Information Security Officer for the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC as it's commonly called. That sounds like a really interesting job. Can you tell us a little bit about your rich history working in government and some of the key responsibilities you take on these days with the SEC?
Yeah, as you mentioned, CISO at the SEC. I've had 3 stints in government. 2 were at the Department of Treasury, where I kind of went in and out of public and private sector responsibilities. And then my current stint here at SEC. I really seem to have this problem with taking on really hard missions with really satisfying outcomes. So in terms of my current role, I'm really focused on the security of the agency from both operations and a compliance standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I have a lot of great questions for you, Jeff. Thank you for being here. And Emilio, thank you also for joining us. I know how busy you are as a top expert in this field. Now, you are the Chief Information Security Officer for Datadog, which has a great reputation for not just technical excellence, but also working very closely with your private sector customers. Can you tell us a little bit about your unique and impressive history working in technology and with government, and maybe some of the really fascinating things that you get to do today at Datadog with some of your public sector customers?
Yeah, certainly. So again, thanks for having me. So I've been with Datadog for 6 years. I oversee the security and compliance world, but I also dabble a little bit in the CIO-ish world because I do have all IT and SR and reliability engineering rolls up into the security organization. So I not only sympathize with modernization, but also with the operational challenges that the co-panelists in our audience is faced with. I do have a history of software engineering background and did a long stint with the federal government before. I was just sharing earlier about some memories of driving into Fort Meade and seeing all the cars fully covered in snow. I live in Southern California now, so that seems like a very distant memory to me. But at Datadog, we have a very interesting view of the world because we get to work with large commercial companies, a lot of these AI cloud native startups, and as well as the public sector. So it gives us a very interesting view of the challenges, but also the solutions and approaches that each company is doing. So we've been working with the public sector for quite a while through our FedRAMP journey. The joke that I have is that just when I thought I left the federal government, it pulls me back in as I have to work with you all on the federal FedRAMP compliance and all of those. But getting to talk to leaders from the public sector has given me a really good understanding of some of the challenges and the scale of those challenges, and definitely built an appreciation for that. So excited to be here and hopefully share some lessons that people can take in and learn from.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you all for talking about your really amazing backgrounds. I'm sure our audience appreciates having such experienced guests to talk about this topic today. We certainly have the right folks with us for that. Now, as I mentioned during the introduction, modernization is a critical topic that every government agency is pursuing. The recent government shutdown gave an opportunity for many agencies to pause and reassess those efforts, although in general, those efforts have been a priority in most agencies for some time. So let's level set the situation about the need for modernization, and then we can get into some of the key challenges to doing that, and finally get some great advice and some examples from our guests about how to make those efforts successful. So, Jeff, thank you again for being here. Let's begin the level setting part of the show with you, if that's all right. Now, modernization is something that every government agency has undertaken at some point. Some of our guests here on these FedInsider shows have described it as kind of an ongoing process for them. So let me ask you, in terms of your current modernization priorities, I know you say you like to take on tough challenges. What are some of the key areas that you are looking to modernize or evolve at the SEC?
I think everything that I'm doing at the SEC so far is focused on acceleration. I think we've got a lot of bureaucratic processes that were very appropriate for the environment that we used to operate, which was heavily on premise, a lot of paper-driven standards and so forth. And so I'm taking those paradigms and making them go faster, and in some ways dispensing with them altogether. And all those things are contributing towards making the operation move faster and not just more efficiently. But it's not just a matter of throwing tools and automation at things. I'm also trying to sort of slenderize the factory itself. Doing less things, but equally important things is really important. So we're also trying to sort of shrink the attack surface by consolidating a lot of the platforms we operate that do the same things. And that also has the added benefit for those of you that are taxpayers, which is almost all of you. It frees up, the dollars that we spend that are your dollars on spending them more prudently and less of them to operate the things we have. So key important ingredients as we look to make things go better.
That makes sense. It's interesting you mentioned redundant tools and platforms. I hear that as a modernization challenge from a lot of federal agencies that I talk with, and also a lot of the state and local government people have that same problem. At the SEC, why do you think that those redundant platforms or tools kind of grew up to the point where you can now get a lot of value by consolidating them? How did that forest kind of grow?
I think that, and I think this is very common at almost every agency. You have nearly every agency has a real diversity of missions. If you look at my time at Treasury, right? They make money, make coins, make paper currency. They fight financial crime. They have sanctions. They obviously have a headquarters element, and we can't forget about the IRS. Those organizations may have very disparate missions, but at the end of the day, they're either making something, factory, right? They're processing data for citizen service and or administrating the agency itself, which is financial management, hiring, and so forth. Really, there's been an emergence of very capable platforms that become these, real workhorses that are feature-rich, proven, FedRamped, which is great. So I think that in the process, we can take these sort of purpose-built point solutions built, in the 2010s and 2020s, early times, and consolidate to a single platform that can satisfy everybody's organizational needs. And that's not to say that there aren't widgets here and there that are very specific to somebody's natural mission work, but there should be fewer in number, and we can work with larger product owners to incorporate those things that are necessary for specific expert needs.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jeff. I have a lot of questions for you in just a bit, so appreciate you kind of helping to level set the situation for us. And Emilio, again, thank you for being here as well. Now, in terms of your question for the level setting part of the show today, I want to ask you about that pause that came about during the recent government shutdown, since that's also a theme of the show today. Certainly, the pause in government operations put a lot of work on hold, but did it also provide a unique opportunity to reevaluate some of those modernization efforts? What kinds of innovative activities did your public sectors learn from or do during that pause?
Yeah, so certainly. So the one thing first I got to start with is I do want to acknowledge upfront the challenge that this pause gave the public sector, and I think I have the privilege of working for a company that if we do have a reliability issue, we'll get to live the next day. You all live in an environment where an issue impacts people's livelihood. So I thank you all for the work and all the hard work that goes into it. So certainly I don't work in the public sector, so I don't have all the answers, right? But I can tell you about the patterns that we're seeing across agencies. And what we did notice and what we heard from our customers is that the pause of it naturally was uncomfortable. The work didn't stop. It impacted a lot of the momentum that was ongoing, but it did expose certain areas of opportunity, brittle integrations, dependencies that were not well understood, systems that maybe were operating but nobody knew exactly who owned them, what they're about, but because of they were sort of being absorbed by some other teams or some other things. And the resiliency of these systems also was reflected with the pause as things now you're all being asked to do more with less. It's like, okay, how do we get this done? And these systems being put under a lot of pressure. So a lot of manual labor and intervention and heroics done there. So what we're seeing now is sort of that push of instead of what else do we modernize, is how well do we actually understand an environment and where do we need to make the proper changes. So I think it created a good framework for thinking about proper modernization, which isn't like you just go get a bunch of different things. Is what do you invest, what's important to you, and how confident are you that you know what's happening in your environment, especially for those mission critical systems. So I think that's the focus shift that we're seeing on our side is that attention to what's critical and how confident are we to make decisions. How do we know when something is broken? How do we know what changes we need to make? So this is where we see ourselves helping our customers, is providing that one platform or one view of the world that can become the source of truth for them. But that focusing, we're always been focusing on mission, but now it's like, what are the mission critical systems and how well do we understand them? How confident are we of that understanding? That we're seeing that mindset shift towards now.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense, Emilio. Thank you. It's good because I know you kind of get to see a broad overview of the government, so I appreciate your insights on that question. Appreciate that. And Bridget, once again, we do appreciate you joining us today. Now, it was interesting hearing about the modernization priorities from Jeff and Emilio, especially getting things restarted after that pause. For the level setting part of the show today, I'm really interested to hear what are some of your top modernization priorities and projects that the Department of Energy is working on now. You probably get asked that all the time, but what are your top modernization goals?
Ironically, they are not drastically different than what Jeff just raised. Like there's 3 goals that we have for 26 and beyond. One is unifying and simplifying. It's what Jeff was saying about the redundant, fragmented systems. We were seeing where someone could have a pretty modern system and other people are still using Outlook and sending over manual processes. And then someone's job was to combine those together. So unifying and simplifying, beginning to the end solutions. We have one where a lot of our offices are doing notice of funding opportunities, and everyone was coming to our team to build different smaller systems. And once we put those together, like we can have a beginning to end. We all work for the same deputy secretary. Let's give them something unified. The other, and also Jeff hit on, is the need for speed. Like we don't have the luxury to start a modernization effort that takes 5 years. What can we deliver in 3 months? What can we deliver in 6 months? So that we're showing that movement, that we're able to, yes, not get everyone off. And even in that unifying one, start with one office, one process to show that movement. It also helped us with change management because there were individuals that, even though they hated their process, they didn't want to change their process with the new technology. So rolling those together, we also, in that aspect, have an HR modernization. It's one of those areas that it hit on a lot of offices, but we were having like slow, still batch processes because they were old legacy system. And then lastly, it's around cybersecurity. We were getting where a group is looking to bring on a new technology. We have delegated authority to review that security information. So at DOE, there is 40 different CISOs. And so for our headquarters CISO to be able to actually look at what the risk is and to compare it, he worked across the board to be able to say, we're going to do like a common taxonomy and say, this is what our risk level is going to be. So it's taking FedRAMP get to say 75%, if we could have that DOE level to get us another 90, and then it's minor pieces of what data, whether it's different from our Office of Science versus our Office of Hygiene, where there's a few tweaks to it. But before, everyone was starting that authority to operate process, which again, for Melio, we could love your product, but if it's 5 months before we can start using it, then it's like, okay, one group does it, and then someone's like, we'll just use our old process. So comparing that and also putting it where you're able to scale that, leveraging it from other agencies. So if Jeff has already done it and it's very similar, we would like to work across the board to be able to leverage those pieces, and that brings that modernization effort to fruition and production a lot quicker.
Yeah, wow, that's a really smart strategy, Bridget. Thank you for explaining that. That makes a lot of sense. And thank you all for those really detailed responses for the level setting part of the show. That was really interesting, and it brings up a lot of questions for our next couple of sections. So thank you all for level setting the things for our audience today. I'm sure they very much appreciate it. And speaking of our amazing audience, I would like to invite all of you watching the show today. Please submit any questions you might have to our really great panel today. I mean, all of our guests are the top experts in their field when it comes to this topic. So I can't think of a better group. If you have a question, these folks probably have the answers for you. We're going to try to get to at least some of your questions live on the show today, but if there's not enough time, we will round them all up and give them to our speakers afterwards. So in any case, don't miss your chance to get your questions in front of this really incredibly talented group of people. I see some of you already are, so please keep those questions coming in. We definitely always love to hear from you. Okay, so now that everybody is on the same page about the topic today, let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about some of the challenges of modernization at agencies. And then we'll move into my favorite part of the show, where we get some really great advice from our guests and address some of those challenges as it pertains to modernization. So, Emilio, let me start with you in this challenges section of the show, since, as I mentioned, you get to kind of see an overview of what's going on at different government agencies. Now, I know the government challenges can sometimes be unique compared with the private sector, and also pretty numerous. But in terms of moving ahead with modernization programs, what are some of the key pain points that many agencies that you work with are facing these days?
Yeah, so I think the main pain points that we see are echoing what Bridget and John just spoke about, right? It's the evolution of what I think it's what we call tech debt, which is a very natural thing. Same thing as blind spots, right? Those are not failures. It's just a matter of how a system or a set of systems have organically grown throughout time, and you end up with a bunch of separate systems, separate platforms, separate sources of truth, separate data sets, some manual processes, some more automated. So this disjointed thing, I think it's just a natural evolution of growth. We even see it in the private sector. So this is just not public sector specific. So those blind spots are the main issue that we see, right? It's the customers, what they're asking for us for is, how can we actually understand what's happening in our environment when something is starting to break? But knowing that something isn't operating right is fine, but then how do we actually get to solve the issue is what it matters the most. So when you think about incident response, monitoring, alerting, incident management, problem management, those things are things that we hear a lot, because what these disjointed systems do is, maybe you don't have the right eyes looking at it. Maybe the eyes that are monitoring a system don't understand the system that is actually firing an alert. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know what's going on. So this is where we've been helping a lot of our private and public sector customers is, like I said, it's not just understanding here's their environment and a single source of data that you can trust to help you determine where the changes are needed, what changes have happened, how do you approve changes. But then when something is broken, is how do you get the right people involved, and how do you get to a solution as fast as possible? And I know later on we'll talk about some more of the current advanced technology that, and I believe Bridget mentioned AI, and I know we're addressing that separately, but where does this actually sit? Because at the end of the day, mean time to detection, mean time to resolution are very key important KPIs that we're helping customers with that. So not dissimilar to private sector is things have grown beyond our means to manage. And now we're looking to gain that confidence that we know exactly what's happening. And when we do need to make decisions, how do we trust the data to make those? And we see that from our customers.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Amelia. I appreciate that. That definitely is something that we're seeing everywhere. So thank you for that. And Bridget, one other thing that we hear from our government guests here at FedInsider quite often is the challenges of budget, both in terms of actual money allocated and also in the number of qualified staff members. It's often something that complicates highly technical modernization efforts. So I'm going to ask you, how are you in the Department of Energy balancing the need to modernize with the limits of available budget and staffing? And then we also have an audience question from one of our friends at the United States Post Office who wanted to ask if you could comment on external revenue sources and appropriated funding and how you get that for your respective agency. If you could maybe address both of those, that'd be great.
Sure. Yes, budget is a challenge that every agency face. You can ask Jeff probably the same question. We'll give you a similar answer in that aspect. It is that 2-year budget cycle. And so it is tough to look ahead 2 years from now, what technology is going to be available, what are your needs? And what we've done at Department of Energy is to look at it from a priority standpoint of what is our true mission objectives, and then what are the areas that are hindering that. And a lot of times the things that we end up picking that we're going to tackle are ones that help do both. Like it's supporting the mission and it can make our lives a little easier. And it's been creativity because we did receive that our budget decreased. And so what are the bare minimum, keep the lights on, operation and maintenance areas? So we carved that out first and then looked at what we can do to modernize. And we went back to part of the question before of when we're prioritizing, what can we honestly do in a short time? So it's more of the short term and long term goals is what we set. In that area, again, Amelia just hit on from a data standpoint, we did look to stand up an enterprise data platform. Data is needed for AI, it's needed for those decisions. And so we did a foundational data platform. Groups that had no platform at all were able to leverage that. And the groups that already had something, because again, they're in different stages, were able to integrate. So we were able to have that centralized source truth of our data to allow leadership to make decisions. And so we presented our CIO with 4 different potential modernization efforts and we weighed them. We said what aligns with the administration, what aligns with our secretary goals, and what can we do based on the resources that we have. We have a great partner, again, from our consulting area that already had developers that can develop. So we already knew that. And then looking at those efficient ways. As part of our analysis between the technology, there was one that can give you everything, but it was a little more expensive versus one that we're able to pay for based on just consumption. So we went that route because we can go as fast or slow, but we have a little more control over how much we spend versus if we had to pay it up front. Lastly, from external sources, we are able to, again, partner because we have the 17 national labs that work across federal government and industry. So other agencies like USPS could leverage the expertise of our labs. We're able to IPAC or funding memos, funding over. And then lastly, it's areas like the Technology Modernization Fund. Not a surprise, as I'm a board member on it, that we are reauthorized and looking to support modernization efforts for 2026. So agencies that have great ideas, but again, 2 years ago did not request for funding. It is applying for types of funds that is like made for modernization efforts.
Yeah, no, very detailed answer, Bridget. Really appreciate that. And thank you for addressing the audience member's question as well. And Jeff, now every agency is different, of course. For example, our guests from the military on shows like this often have unique concerns or challenges compared with those in healthcare. So I was just curious, I mean, at the SEC, you work with a lot of financial institutions and also you handle quite a bit of confidential or sensitive information that could, for example, influence the stock market and so forth. As such, do you have any unique challenges that you face when it comes to information handling and upgrading or modernizing your infrastructure?
It's not just the sensitive information that we process, but the manner in which it gets shared, as well as, how the information gets used and the integrity is maintained. And the reason for that is while we have a massive data analytics mission where we consume a ton of data, a lot of the work we do in enforcement involves, right, investigations and litigation. And that ultimately, at the end of the day, winds up with lawyers who are very keen on making sure that chain of custody of evidence, which is typically electronic evidence, is maintained. The data is not tampered with. It's perfect copies. The data can be reproduced if it was created with an analytical tool. And so it's not just a matter of encrypting something and throwing it across the transom to somebody else and it's encrypted in transit. It's a matter of the non-repudiation of the person that's receiving the information. I think the second challenge we have is, and it's a lot similar to what I encountered in the intelligence community, is we process a ton of non-public information. But there is subsets of that information that if it were to disclose, and might be a little dramatic, but could represent an existential threat to a company. So a negative filing about the company that's not yet made public, but may have, catastrophic impacts on their financial condition. And as a result, the stock market tumbles against their respective stock. So not all information that's sensitive is created equally, and not everybody should be able to see it. And so data entitlement management is a really important thing to do above and beyond just standard confidentiality matters. And when we modernize those things, we have to do it slowly. We have to get aboard records management and legal personnel to make sure that we're not violating any of those sort of paradigms that they have for operating in the world in which they operate.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clarifying that very much. That is really interesting, and it really helps to explain some of the unique challenges that agencies are facing when it comes to modernizing their infrastructure. Now, let's get to that great part of the show where we get some practical advice from our guests about how to improve the efficiency of their modernization process, especially now that the pause in operations is over and those programs can get back into full swing. So, Emilio, in the previous section of the show, made it pretty clear that agencies are facing a lot of challenges when it comes to consolidating their systems and doing, as you said, more with less. It sounds like what a lot of agencies need is clear observability into their environment, regardless of how distributed it might be. First off, am I correct on that? And could you maybe explain why observability is so important as a component of both cybersecurity and modernization these days?
Yeah, happy to. And yes, I think you're spot on. Ultimately, you can't modernize what you can't see, and that's probably the best way of summarizing. In security, we always say you can't protect what you don't see. And I think it applies in so many different aspects than just security. But we think observability is foundational, right? Because it's not just about knowing uptime or CPU utilization or storage utilization of your systems. It's to also being able to establish what normal behavior looks like, detect anomalies, and it really explain the impact with confidence. I would imagine most of us would agree that responding to an issue of a system that is not mission critical is very different than one that is. And being able to understand what's mission critical, why is it, what's the lineage, right, of this system based on the workflow or the use case that it supports or the mission that it supports is highly critical for any of these agencies and any company to understand there's a system. So this is where observability comes in. But the public sector obviously operates in a very highly regulated and complex environment. So having that confidence matters when it comes to containment. Who can make that decision? How do you build those run books? How do you even understand what's normal, like I mentioned, and what are your service level objectives to that? So this is where observability platform can come in, where you can define, like Bridget just mentioned, having 40 CISOs, which I was gonna write in the comment that sounds like a beginning of a joke, but getting to an agreement of what actually is acceptable across 40 CISOs is a very difficult task. You ask them one question, you get 40 different answers. But having a platform that lets you define that and codify that in a way that then can automatically tell you, hey, this thing is becoming deficient. Not this thing is already way deficient. There's a deviation happening from what's normal here. And understanding who needs to act on it, what needs to be done. And when we get to the AI part, then it's like, okay, maybe letting the AI sort of help you do some of that. I think it's key for any observability platform to support. And to Bridget's point earlier, when I joined Datadog and I was meeting with customers around our initial FedRAMP initiative, I remember seeing slides and hearing plans from these agencies about a 10-year plan to move to the cloud. I think those days are pretty much gone, right? To Bridget's point. And there is a complexity there that I'm sure some of it will take that long, but if you're not making progress in 3 months, I think you're going to be way behind. And I think that's the reality that we all live in now. So having a platform that works with you, but also it's so easy to adopt and immediately gives you the data that you need is critical also, as you're all looking for a partner there. But this is what observability is critical to you. It's understanding what's happening and when is it not happening. And you get to define that yourself, or it helps you define that based on common patterns that it's seen already.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Amelia. Are there any concrete steps that the agencies can take to kind of increase their observability or lay the groundwork so that they can get more observability once they start moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think the one question that we always get asked when I talk to customers about where do they get started, right? Because when you say observability, it could mean everything. It could be certain systems. It could be so I think getting to understanding whether you wanted to start observing from an infrastructure standpoint or from a user experience standpoint, right? So one customer on the public sector, and you know, they do the ID verification or even the passport service, right? So their main concern was, how do I know if a citizen is clicking on a button and that goes nowhere? That was critical to them. So they wanted to get started from the user experience standpoint. We talked to other customers that are worried about, hey, this one database is so critical to us that I want to understand if that thing is starting to show any signs of issues. So they start from the infrastructure side. So I think having that understanding is critical because it helps you then select where you want to get started. Observability can be a big problem to solve, and you don't want to boil the ocean the first day. So understanding how do you get introduced to observability is critical. So pick one of few critical use cases. Use the data that you already have. So understanding like what are the complaints that you're already seeing, what complaints are you hearing, and maybe tackle that first, and then expand from there as you see fit. I think it would be the first critical step to take.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Thank you, Amelia. Appreciate the practical advice. And Bridget, in terms of modernization and getting that observability like Amelia was talking about, what are some of the most important steps that agencies can take or that you are taking to help prioritize modernization and get more visibility and observability into their networks? I mean, it sounds like you have a large infrastructure, so maybe looking at observability across the board might not be something that you want to look at or something. I'm just kind of get your insights on that.
It is. Emilio hit on it. In order for us to properly select and prioritize what we're going to change is to understand that foundation of where we are in our current status. And so even though we do have like the vast, our governance is still centralized. And part of what we try to acknowledge is the different missions, but it's if this is our preferred technology, what is the snowflake aspects that makes it unique, why we need to do something different. And we started that foundation across where our deputy secretary does head up our information, cybersecurity, IT/OT governance board. And within there, we have our AI board, we have our data governance board, our enterprise architecture. So those are subgroups that we still feed up there, where it's an agency decision, not just one office. And so we do more of that coordination because we do need to have insights into what has been purchased, what we're planning on purchasing, so we can make the best like taxpayer decision across the board. One of the areas from an enterprise architecture is that we did find that some of us had like different rates. And so some of those we were able to work with our partners to get an enterprise license agreement where everyone can get the same period of performance, but the same rate. Those savings allowed us to do some modernization. So it's that creativity of what we know, we can make some improvements and then be able to benefit from that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Appreciate that, Bridget. Jeff, it's really interesting to hear about observability as a core component to modernization. It's something I hadn't really thought about too much before. And I know you kind of do this and you've done this in other places. Let me ask you, those gaps in visibility where you're not seeing things, where do they normally hide, and how can agencies go about locating them and as they try to bring everything in together into one place and get that observability?
It's the legacy systems. It's the systems that have had, continuous care and feeding, and they have uptime, and they've, been maybe receiving patches and feature upgrades, or maybe an entire upgrade of the system itself, but they were never originally integrated fully into the enterprise operating concept. And so those are often the ones that are lingering. The easy button is to simply, I'm going to move them to the cloud, where in the case of SEC, observability is built to our infrastructure as code. But that's easier said than done. And meanwhile, until that migration is complete, the exposure lives on. I think the second thing that we've learned over the years is when we talk about observability, it's not just being able to observe things in individual assets or whatever it might be, but it's actually what you can observe. So at a prior federal agency, we had an intrusion. We had the standard observability, right? We had EDR logs, we had all the network telemetry of how the threat actor was moving around, how they got in, and so forth. But one of the things we had configured very deliberately was we were able to tell what files the threat actor had actually opened and looked at in the course of the intrusion. That allowed us to do kind of two things. One is we were able to assess what their interest was in being on the inside and which particular targets they were looking at and why. And then second of all, when everything was said and done, we could also assess, the impact of the information that was viewed. So it's about being very deliberate from a risk paradigm of what you can observe and how you might need to use it in a specific context, not just having everything at your disposal because you must or you need to, or you can get it.
Yeah, no, that's a great story, Jeff. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, I always love to hear those post-breach stories and lessons learned. Let's continue the discussion a little bit then, since obviously you've been doing this. I wanted to ask you, are there any techniques or procedures that you have found helpful to try and streamline consolidation, observability, and your modernization process that you might share with us? I mean, that was a great story, and that kind of makes sense what was going on the backside. Knowing that and knowing how it could have been better, are there any things that you would recommend, for agencies in the future to kind of deal with situations like that and get more observability?
This is a huge shift for what I would say, maybe not necessarily in defense or in intel, but certainly in the private sector, which is giving my teams the opportunity to experiment. And I don't mean an innovation lab or some team that's just doing R&D, but while technology firms, they have and they will continue to dominate the innovation space, what I learned at NSA and elsewhere is that there are a lot of smaller boutique companies that are making very unique point solutions. And so for us to have the opportunity to look at them and maybe even put them to use experimentally or try them out in a safe and controlled environment is something much different than the traditional life cycle, which we've had, which is we wait for a large company to integrate some sort of unique feature into their product, which means it went onto a roadmap. It took a year to test and made generally available to the public. And meanwhile, we've had to acquire an upgrade in order to receive that feature, which means that we had to go through the acquisition process. It's all too slow. And so the ability to kind of bring in those solutions and test them out is huge. I think the second part of it is, we can look at open source. There's an entire cottage industry around this. And if you look at pretty much every modern software security product out there, it's built on open source or it's got open source components. And so the ability to bring those into, like I said, safe and controlled environment and stack those things together, because they're all API enabled at the end of the day, or they all speak JSON. And turn those into our own solutions is a huge thing. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of the build it revolution come around. And I think experimentation is a real enabler for that. And it's a much different paradigm in the civil sector than we've really ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't hear about that in the private sector, obviously. I mean, it's fail it until you make it and things like that. But government, because of their emphasis on security and kind of being very risk averse, you don't really see that. But you're saying there is a way that you can bring those smaller teams and that innovation into government agencies, but do it in a safe way that's kind of government approved, if you will.
I've seen, I worked in the financial sector with the largest banks in the world, as well as some of the most important financial technology companies in the world. And if you know anything about banks, they are very risk-averse organizations. But technologically, they have now, as Emilio has probably seen, they have cyber innovation units, which are full-blown teams that meet with venture capitalists and PE firms and small shops in Israel and all those different places that are vetting these products, that are looking for opportunities to give them an edge, either defensively or in a response scenario. And I don't see any reason why the government can't do that carefully, controlled, and responsibly, without distracting from us being able to execute our core mission. So it's something we've got to pursue more aggressively.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jeff. That's a very interesting point. Appreciate you sharing that with us. And Bridget, I actually have an audience question for you that I thought was really insightful, and I'd like to get your take on this. Now, I want to talk about modernization. I also want to talk about future proofing, and this kind of goes to the audience members' question. It seems like a lot of the challenges that you and the other guests talked about today are a result of decisions that were made a long time ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now you're trying to deal with that and trying to modernize things. How can we ensure that future modernization efforts face fewer headwinds because of the smart technology and infrastructure decisions that we're making today?
I think that is a very good question. And part of it is we're looking at it as a whole. Like, we're not looking at one single piece. As my colleagues, as we're tackling, I make sure that our CISO is at the table. I ensure that operations is there, and a couple of our stakeholders, where if it's a problem and it's niche to one office, then that's maybe not where we wanted to do a modernization effort, that it needs to be based on the time that it's going to have a broader impact is one of the areas that we're looking to do. And to Q, and another question is around the tech debt and tech sprawl, that we're not just buying, to Jeff's statement, technology for the sake of it, that there is a purpose, and that we've able to do that bake off between a few of them, so that we already know the pros and cons and what we need to adapt to. So those are that smarter way of doing it. Because one of the big things that we are addressing now is, a few years ago, they did a lift and shift. So they took all of the mainframes, shift them into the cloud, but the processes are still mainframe. They're still old process. So yeah, you're in the cloud, but you're not leveraging any of the cloud native services. So we have no improvement. So that if we are adding technology, that it's making it better, it's streamlining, it's saving us time, or it's saving us money, or both, but it's got to be some improvement, not to just check the box to say, oh, now we are in the cloud. We're actually seeing some of those on the negative side, because it's more expensive to do mainframe in the cloud, with still needing to keep some of those developers, is one of the things that we're trying to be smart as we're making some of those modernization decisions.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you, Bridget. And thank you for addressing the audience member's question again. Now, Emilio, right now, as you well know, artificial intelligence is a hot topic. And here on the show, too, there's like 3 questions about it coming in. I think there might be 4, actually. So let me ask you, I mean, there's a lot of hype around AI, but also a lot of value, I think, if it's properly tuned. So in terms of modernization efforts, is there a place for AI to sit in there? And where can AI, if it's smartly deployed, do the most good for agencies in terms of modernization or even observability?
Yeah, I mean, we think there is, and to your point, I think it needs to be done responsibly. Our CEO said this in an interview the other day, which I thought was interesting, is right now, if a human is correct 70% of the time, we think of it as an acceptable metric. But if AI is correct only 70% of the time, we think of it as a buggy product. So it's really interesting how the mindset is shifting there. We do think AI can provide a lot of help, right? And this is going to be a journey, particularly in the public sector, as we've all talked about, right? There are regulations and there's governance involved. You have to understand where the data is coming from and how it's being trained. But their advice is to start thinking about how AI can help and the agentic approach. I saw an audience question around, has anyone found an agentic solution? And my response to that question internally was for what purpose, right? And I think that's key to hear when he thinks about AI is these AIs on these agents are good for specific purposes. They're general models that are more for helping you summarize and things like that. But when it comes to modernization, what you look for is an AI agent or an AI product that is helping you understand out of these 1,000 different data points, what you should focus on, what's actually important, where is the deviation here, and then work that into what actions can you take. Here's the root cause analysis. So this is something that we're working on, and we're seeing a lot of positive reception from our customer base. Is not just the anomaly detection to help you understand and get to decisions faster for incident response, but then also help you get to root cause analysis faster as well. So that takes a lot of the data crunching out of the human mind, but it still keeps the human in the loop, which I think is important for the public sector and the private sector as well, where the humans can then say, okay, this actually makes sense. No, you know what? You got this a little bit wrong, going back to that 70% thing. No, Bob, like this is wrong. Bob being the AI agent. Here's actually how you correct it. And have an agent that then says, okay, well, you know, a lot of these agents are pretty clever because they tell you you're absolutely right to make you feel good about the agent being wrong. But then self-correct and understand that. But at the end of the day, what an agent is there to do is to help you get to that decision, to that root cause analysis, and solve your problems faster. So I do think there is a huge element here that AI agents can play. We're actively working on this, but like I said, we have to do it responsibly with our public sector customers because there's a lot of models that we work with. We have our own, but we need them to get certified. We have to make sure that they're certified so that, going back to Bridget's comment about earlier, where if it's going to take a year for you to be able to use it, and then what's the point, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is already approved, that if you like what you see and you can experiment, to Jeff's point of making it easier for experimentation so you can go try it and see how much value it gives you. So, but I think we think of the world where it's going, and this might sound a little sci-fi-ish, but it's health healing systems. And I do believe that eventually we're going to be able to get there.
Yeah, no, I hope so. That's really interesting, Amelia. Thank you for addressing the AI question. We always have to do that. Everybody seems interested in that. This has been a really amazing discussion. We're unfortunately running a little bit short on time, but I think I can sneak in at least one more question to each of our amazing guests before we have to say goodbye today. So, Bridget, first off, thank you again so much for being here. I really loved having you on the show. It was great having you here as part of the amazing discussion today. For my final question to you, I wanted to ask you about the latter parts of any modernization effort, and that is kind of evaluating those programs and measuring those successes. What metrics or performance indicators should be used in order to see if agencies are actually getting a good return on their investment with these new modernization programs? How can we best measure success?
Look at it as upfront as we're starting that effort of setting like 3 or 4 measures that we were going to do throughout the process. The big one is around time and cost. Again, to build on what Emilio was saying from AI, we had a couple of different AI tools that were deployed, but some were like, oh, we had 8 users. Okay, but the time it took you those 2 months to build that, 8 users, but there's others that have thousands. It's the adaptability, it's the ease of users that are not just technical, it's anyone that's able to use it. So if you're a non-technical person as well as your executive can use it, then we looked at that as a positive. It's also the value. We look at it from, again, the time that it saves. If it took you like 3 weeks to do something and now you can do it in minutes. So those are some of the metrics, and then that follow on. So also, again, if you're the cost to build is the same to operate. Again, that may not have the same return on investment as you did your build, but then operating and maintaining it is a lower. Your developers can move on to the next project. They aren't there that have to constantly be there to update it. So like our models, we have them update that once a year, but we turn on web grounding so that we're able to access. So even if the models aren't updated from an AI, you still get up to like 24 hours delay in that. So building something in a smart architecture that it doesn't require as much operation and maintenance to maintain it is another factor that we try to factor in.
Yeah, sounds like a great way to measure success. Thank you so much. And Jeff, thank you also for joining us today. It sounds like you're making some great progress when it comes to modernizing and consolidating your systems there at the SEC, as well as adding observability and doing some experimenting with smaller teams. It sounds great. For our audience today who may be wanting to follow along in your successful footsteps, do you have any advice about what they should do or where they can go to begin to address some of those issues and challenges within their own organizations?
Start with the tools you have available and see what you can harness from them. I think, believe it or not, a lot of the tools that you have literally in your environment, those companies have maybe made strides to build automations, or there may be automation capabilities that you're not using as part of those tools. Simply either sometimes you don't even know they're available because it's, something you bought and don't really understand that you had it all along. Second of all, you may not understand it. And third, you just may not be using it because you're satisfied with what you have right now. So I think that's important. I think the second thing is, it goes to the experimentation phases. There's things you can do that are very low risk activities. So for example, my security operations center right now, I get a nightly or morning report of all the sort of things they're tracking overnight. I get a very plain language, which AI has written, summary of what the particular matter it is. I don't have to, and I'm a very technical guy, but I don't have to translate whatever they wrote originally into something that's more plain language. So that's a really simple and easy and quick win that makes my life easier, most certainly. A second, thing that we've done, and I experienced this week, we had a false positive incident. The SOC had used automation and AI to pull all the relevant telemetry, develop an incident summary, and develop the report. So when I apprised my leadership, it was a very quick exercise. I didn't have to wait for 4 to 8 hours for the fact pattern to be presented to me. I was able to, do it, very quickly. Low experiment, right? Low cost, low risk. If it didn't work, they send me the old stuff. We work with it. We deal with it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there to start taking a look at not low hanging fruit, actually like high hanging fruit, but things that are lower risk. So those are the two things that I think, from philosophically, I'm recommending for people that really want to start getting results quickly.
Makes sense to me. Thank you so much, Jeff. Really appreciate you being
Sure.
here. And Emilio, that means you get the last word on the panel today. First off, thank you also for being here. It was great to have your expertise and insight and perspective with us today. Now, the show today, we covered a lot of ground and a lot of very technical topics in a very short period of time. I mean, our hour flew by really quickly. As such, I want to ask you, are there any key points that we either missed or which you'd like to reiterate to make sure that our audience today leaves with some really good information so they can start to tackle their own modernization challenges?
I echo what Bridget and Jeff has said. I think the only thing I would add is it's what's clear is we've gone beyond monitoring just uptime and just in time sort of snapshots of state of things, right? Like you may have already solutions, or also look for solutions that you can partner with that give you a constant view of what's happening. So not just a just in time, continuous monitoring, allow you to monitor your controls. At the end of the day is how do you have clarity that you can understand what's happening in real time in your environments, and being able to communicate that confidently with your stakeholders, your leaders, and that at the end of the day, your customers, me being one, is get to benefit from this improvements of the modernization. Also, partner with, I think something said here that we didn't get to dig in deeper is look for these platforms that have openness not a platform isn't always going to integrate with 100% of the things that you have. To Jeff's point, you might already have some things in your arsenal that you don't know of, but as long as you can talk API, as long as the documentation is open, you can do a lot of great things internally where maybe, or with a partner, say like Bridget mentioned, having a consultant that does development for you, that will get you a solution faster than hoping that, hey, this gets put on a roadmap, it might eventually get there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for you to rely on your private sector partners to build for you, but also for you to build internally, because we all understand there's nuances in everything that we do and everything that we own. So I think that's a key thing to think about as well.
Excellent, and a great way to end the show, Emilio. Thank you so much. Thank you all for talking with me about this fascinating topic today. I learned so much today. I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you to our superstar speakers today, Bridget, Jeff, and Emilio, for joining us to talk about this really critically important topic in government, and for our amazingly attentive audience. I appreciate all of you being here to chat with us about that. And thank you also to our amazing audience. I'm so glad that you were all with us today and sent some great questions in. We really appreciate that. Also, please check out our future schedule of shows. We have a lot of great content here coming up right around the corner, and I hope to see all of you there as well. So let me turn things now over to FedInsider's Claudia Hosky for some final thoughts for our amazing audience today.
Thank you, John, and thanks again to everyone for your participation today. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends, and you'll get another email from our partners at the George Washington University in about a week with a link to your CPE credit. Remember to log back in the next day or two if you want to download a copy of our closed captioning transcript. And as John mentioned, we have many webinars in the works. So visit FedInsider.com, where you can see what is coming up and register for multiple events at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is FedInsider signing off.